Mary Hager, Newsweek correspondent and one of the authors of this week's cover story in Newsweek titled "The Fear of AIDS." From your knowledge, is the government doing as much as it should be doing to combat this disease?
Well, you know, it's easy to answer that. Obviously, the government could always be doing more in a situation like that. On the other hand, 4 years ago, no one even knew that there was such a disease. We've made amazing progress in 4 years.
Here's what the cover of this week's Newsweek looks like. A couple of school children, I believe probably from Queens, and the headline is "The Fear of AIDS." One of the things you notice, Mary Hager, in this week's publications, including, for instance, People magazine, fear and AIDS in Hollywood. It's a town near hysteria. This morning's Washington Post, Mary McGrory on page 2 writes, "The spread of fear. Americans have turned in their complacency for something like panic." It continues to go on with Time magazine this week. "The new untouchables. Anxiety over AIDS is verging on hysteria in some parts of the country." How about the word hysteria and the word panic? Do you feel that that's where we are in this? Are people really going that far?
Fear is probably the working word. Hysteria is coming, but it's a hysteria or fear, I think, based on what we don't know about AIDS. I mean, it's a scary disease, and it's 100% fatal. The experts disagree. You end up with a situation where one doctor will say it can be spread this way, and most of the people who have been working with it stress that it can only be spread through sexual contact, intimate sexual contact, or through blood and blood products. But there's this idea that if it's in tears, if it's in saliva, that maybe it can be spread somewhere, some other way, even though there's no evidence to back it up yet.
How did you approach this cover story?
After having just done a cover story 5 or 6 weeks ago on AIDS, it was sort of a here we go again attitude. I did most of the medical reporting for this. It meant going back to many of the doctors I'd talked to before. And from a medical perspective, there's not much new. It's very much the same. The doctors are still emphasizing, you know, that as far as they know, it can only be spread in those 2 ways. They're all very careful not to say that doesn't mean it someday, sometime might not be spread casually, but so far they've got studies with families of children who've had hemophilia, and there's no spread to the siblings or to the parents. They've got all these health workers who've been working with AIDS patients. There's no evidence that it's spread to any of them yet.
How many people at Newsweek worked on the cover story?
You know, I can't really answer that. I think people in all the bureaus worked on it. I know there were 3 people in the Washington Bureau, 3 people in New York. Then Atlanta worked on it, San Francisco worked on it, Boston worked on it, Denver worked on it. That's a lot of people.
When did you see the impetus inside the Bureau for going for another cover story on this subject?
Tuesday afternoon.
What did it?
I think it was the situation in the Queens with the school children. It appeared hysteria was taking hold there. One child, parents holding their hundreds of kids out of school.
It's interesting. Time magazine this week, as we talked yesterday, has a cover story on China moving away from Marx, but inside they devote almost as much space as Newsweek does to the same story on AIDS. The other interesting luck, as it may be for Time magazine, the announcement came out yesterday that Deng Xiaoping was changing the leadership over there by a significant amount, and we aren't going to talk about that this hour, but just pass that on for those of you who...
It's going to be an interesting test of covers.
For next week?
No, for the sales
week, yes.
this year.
Well, that's right, for sales, because it does make a difference, doesn't it,
yeah.
on the newsstand. When you approached the article this week, what did you all say had to be done? I noticed you have a couple of Q&As in here, and you go back and look at, for instance, other epidemics and things like that. Is this all done from New York, or was it most of it done?
That was done from New York. Oh, there are 2 more people I forgot about. Quite a few people worked on this overall project. From Washington, we started out looking at it mostly as a sociological phenomenon. What's the implication of this disease? What does it mean in terms of, I think, health insurance, of who's going to pay for it? There's some indication that insurance companies are a little bit reluctant to cover people who have AIDS. because the costs are about $150,000 just for the hospital care alone.
What our audience is looking at, not to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure they understood this chart. You suggest that when AIDS first was being discussed, it was just on either coast, and now the spread has, the red states show more than 300 cases, and that's Texas and Florida, New York and California, and the goal is between 51 and 150 cases, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, Missouri, Colorado, Arizona, and Louisiana, and the orange is 151 to 300, and so on and so forth. When did it start spreading?
I think the first time AIDS was identified as a specific disease, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, was in 1981. In retrospect, it looks like it started in the late 70s in this country. Since it was identified, it's been doubling, and it's now doubling at a rate of every 10 months. When we did the last cover, which really was 5 or 6 weeks ago, it was like 12,500 cases. Now it's up to close to 13,000.
Do you remember, have you heard how well the last copy of Newsweek that had a cover on AIDS sold? Was that a particularly good seller?
Mm-hmm. Very well.
And why do you think people buy magazines in this case? When it comes to an epidemic, or what's called an epidemic, do people want more information, do you find?
Oh, I think there's a real thirst for knowledge on this subject. It's a scary disease. So much about it is unknown. I think people want to find out as much as they can about it.
In your cover story this week, Jonathan Alter writes about the press and its coverage. Sins of omission, press coverage of AIDS has left some things unsaid. He says up here, the press has in general acted responsibly. He goes on later, and we can talk about that, where there have been some misinterpretations and whatnot. From what you've seen from the very beginning of this, has the press acted responsibly in covering this subject?
That's hard to answer. The press covers such a wide spectrum. In some ways, I think I would have to answer it yes. I think that responsible journalists have covered it responsibly. I think where it's gotten lost sometimes is that the civil rights issues have been sort of intermingled with the medical issues, and that's made it very difficult for people to sort out what is and what is not true about AIDS. For instance, one thing I think that got lost was the whole notion that it's a sexually transmitted disease, because from the very beginning it seemed so focused in the homosexual community that the idea that it really could spread to the general population was obscured for, I think, maybe until 2 or 3 months ago, when it suddenly came clear.
Mary McGrory in the Washington Post this morning writes about the whole subject of AIDS, and one of her paragraphs here, she says, politicians who love to go on talk shows hate to be asked point blank, as two were on David Brinkley's Sunday morning program, if they would send their children to school with known AIDS victims. Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican of Utah, mumbled about its being a matter for local school boards, and Representative Henry Waxman, a Democrat of California, said if the AIDS child were Ryan White, it would be all right. Have you talked to many politicians about this subject, and do you find them backing away from the subject?
I've talked to Henry Waxman about it. He's very knowledgeable on the subject, and so are his staff people. They've been on top of AIDS from the beginning. It's interesting that she used politicians that way. I think if you asked doctors the same thing, you'd get sort of, if it's their child, they'd really want to look at the circumstances. And they're very clear about preschool children, maybe not because they bite and kick and get sick and can't always control themselves. For older children, they would take a different approach, although one doctor last week told me he'd certainly think twice about letting his high school son wrestle with a kid who had AIDS.
Mary Hager has been with Newsweek for 7.5 years. She's originally from Los Angeles and has been in this town for how long? 76?
76. What's that, 9 years?
Spent some time as a freelance reporter and also worked for Life magazine at one point. What did you do for Life?
I was a writer.
That the old Life or the new Life?
The old Life. I wrote on something that was called the Human Body series, and then I spent some time doing news stories. And
before we started, you said that you cover medicine, science, and the environment from AIDS to Superfund. How did you get interested in writing about medicine?
I fell into it accidentally. I took a job as a summer intern many, many years ago for a newspaper, and the person I replaced was the medical writer. It was in Palo Alto, and Stanford has a wonderful medical school, and yeah, I was sort of hooked on it. It's a wonderful field for a journalist.
A few minutes, we'll go to the phones, and the lines are open, 202-628-2525 if you live in the Eastern and Central time zones, 202-783-2727 if you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. Begin dialing now, and we'll go to the phones very shortly and get your views on whether or not you think the AIDS issue has been covered properly or responsibly. And you might look in your morning newspaper to see if there are any stories in there about AIDS. I did that here. Frankly, less than normal in the last several weeks. But here's a story out of the Washington Times, which is something I'm sure you've thought about. Blood shortage, not age-related, Red Cross says. And they talk about blood donors being down here in the Washington area, but from their evidence, it's not tied to AIDS, but they quote others. In our region, we have been told by our donor recruiters that there is a misunderstanding and misinformation about AIDS and giving blood, said Kathy Denton, a spokesman for the Philadelphia region of the Red Cross. Philadelphia's blood supplies last week fell to half the normal levels, and officials on Thursday issued an urgent plea for donations. What did you find about giving blood?
Several things. One is that for some obscure reason that doesn't make any sense at all, some people seem to think that they are in danger of getting AIDS if they give blood. And that's just simply not true. Another thing is there seems to be a reluctance among some people to have the blood screening, which they now do. And I don't know whether it's the, I don't want to find out, or, you know, what would I do if I turned out to be positive? I don't know.
One last question before we go to the phones. We have a call standing by. In People magazine this week, they found a gentleman who has what's called AIDS-related complex, ARC, a fellow by the name of Johnny Green from New Orleans, and they had him go to Hollywood and report on this story, and they tell all about his background in the beginning. Is there more and more a tendency for news organizations to find someone who has something like this to report on it because of the sensitivity of it? Do you have that same situation at all at Newsweek? Anybody that reported on this story have AIDS at Newsweek?
No, but one of the reporters who has worked on it over the years has a brother who had AIDS, who was one of the 5% who had no apparent risk factor.
Sumter, South Carolina, good morning.
Yes, sir. I think the homosexual community has been lax in taking care of their responsibilities, as well as the news media. AIDS is a fatal disease, and it's also preventable, completely preventable. All the homosexuals have to do is quit ingesting urine, semen, and feces, and they eradicate the disease in a very short period of time. I've not read this lady's article, but I have yet to see this mentioned in the media. And the homosexuals are always screaming for the government and everybody else to do something about AIDS. Actually, they're the only ones at this time that can do anything about it. And yet you hear nothing from you people, from the news, or nothing from them about how to prevent it. And it can be prevented 100%.
All right, Sumter, thanks for the call. In your article this week, do you address that? I remember in this Q&A, is that in here?
Not in that. I think there's some mention about the use of condoms, cutting out certain sexual practices. I don't think it gets as explicit as the caller.
Question here, one of the AIDS and myths and reality, what are the risks for women? Is there such a thing as safe sex between a woman and a man who might be carrying the virus? What if the man wears a condom? Can you contract AIDS by kissing an infected person? Can women who have AIDS pass the virus to their male partners? On and on. But what the gentleman said specifically, is that covered in this article?
No. No.
Let's go back to the phones to Edgewater Park, New Jersey. Good morning.
Yes, how do you do? My name is Fred Compton, and I'm calling in connection with this AIDS business. The New York Times declared it a wildfire plague on this Sunday issue, and Brinkley had quite a bit to say about it. And in that hour or so program, they never came up with one symptom. It seemed to me I picked up somewhere that fungus is a symptom, but I don't know much about that. I'm wondering if she has picked up in her research any symptoms in connection with this AIDS operation.
Thank you.
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. The symptoms, what AIDS does is it destroys the immune system. It really destroys the body's ability to fight diseases that are normally held in check. There's a form of pneumonia that is very common among AIDS victims that is caused by a bacteria that I think most of us have all the time. It's just that our bodies are able to keep it in control. AIDS, people who have fully developed AIDS get a whole lot of really bizarre kinds of diseases that we just simply don't get, even though we have that people who do not have the virus don't get, or do not have the disease don't get, because their immune systems are able to control these agents. You mentioned, I think, the AIDS-related complex earlier. That does have a set of symptoms. People lose weight, their lymph glands swell. They generally don't feel very well, but most of them don't quite have the complete destruction of the immune system that people who have AIDS do.
I point out, those of you who are looking for a maximum amount of information in this week's Time magazine, some of the things that the gentleman just called about are dealt with in this article rather explicitly. Not an easy disease to come by. For all its ferocity, AIDS is relatively hard to get. That's Time magazine, and we'll go on and take the next call, but if you might not get all your information in one spot. People magazine has a whole different look at it, as does U.S. News and World Report, which has one page on it in this week's issue, and this photograph, which was taken for U.S. News and World Report. Children as well as parents participated in New York's school boycott. Phone lines are open. Next call, Atlanta, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Omar from Atlanta, Georgia.
Please turn down your television set and go right ahead then.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
That's good.
Okay. I was just listening to your program, and I wanted to ask the lady from the Newsweek about the research that she's done. I've worked in a hospital with AIDS patients that have come basically to either get their last treatment and pass on at the hospital, who have died. We've seen many patients die. And it's just kind of gotten me spooked. I'm now hopefully expecting, and I've worked around these people, and yes, I see the People magazine. I've read articles and everything, but do you really think the doctors are telling us everything about AIDS, that they really know? Because, I mean, we've been heard before there's many diseases that's come along, and there's hepatitis, and they've now got a cure for, some of the symptoms from that. And I just wonder if AIDS is just another disease that's going to go around for a long time, and us not really know any of the real cautions that we need to know, that the medical history is just not, as complete as it should be.
Caller, are you a nurse, or do you just work at the hospital in administration?
I worked on the floor as a nursing assistant and as a unit clerk, and so, but you get real close, especially on the floor we worked on. It was a very private floor, and not a private, just a more restricted floor, because we had AIDS patients and we had different people with a lot of contagious diseases. Did
you have to make any special precautions because of the fact that you had AIDS patients on that floor?
Well, no, we sure didn't. We first, in the very beginning, 2 years ago, we used to wear the mask and the gowns and stuff anytime during entering the room. But now they don't do that. I've since then quit. But now the nurses and everybody just kind of goes in, and if they're in the last stages, they use the mask. But they don't isolate that much anymore, and that kind of makes me wonder about, people just in the hospital.
Okay, thank you for the call. Are doctors telling the truth?
Well, as the doctors I talked to last week pointed out, I think every single one of them said basically the same thing as I work with AIDS patients. I don't use gloves when I shake hands with them. I don't use gloves when I examine them. Most of them do if they're drawing blood, but not all of them. One doctor said, I work with AIDS patients all the time. I work with them very closely. They cough on me, and I'm never going to get infected. And another one said, you know, we're the ones who have the most to lose. There's no reason for us not to be taking precautions if we really felt that we ought to be taking it. They just don't feel that it's as contagious as, say, chicken pox, which I think you can lock someone up with chicken pox 3 stories away from people, and it's so infective that anyone who hasn't had it's going to get it.
Mary Hager is with Newsweek. She is one who participated in this week's cover story, The Fear of AIDS, Ignorance and Uncertainty Fuel Growing Public Concern. Before we take our next call, Mary Hager, when you went to look at what the government was doing, where do you call? Who would be involved in this town in doing something about this?
Well, you go to Congress and you go to the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services.
Did you talk to some of those people?
Yes.
Did you find any unusual amount of interest in this, or is this just like a lot of other issues here? It's one of the many on the plate?
I think at the National Institutes of Health there's a lot of interest in it because it's so new and it's such a challenge. And I mean, they've got, you know, first place, they've got the technology now that makes it possible to study the disease, to isolate the virus, to grow it, to test possible drugs, to, you know, find out what part of the virus might be useful for developing a vaccine. 10 years ago, they couldn't have even done this. They didn't have the tools and the technology. I think that it's viewed as more than just sort of an intellectual and technical challenge, though I think there's a great deal of concern about, you know, any disease that appears this suddenly and spreads this rapidly.
Mary Hager of Newsweek could go to Long Island next. Good morning.
Yes, I'm calling from Long Island, and I'd like to talk on the subject of the blood screening.
Would you please turn down your television set?
Yes. Oh.
Thank you. You get a feedback, as some of you may know.
Okay. You mentioned there was a reluctance as far as the blood screening. I think it's more a lack of information. I'd like to know where you could go. I think a lot of people sitting at home would like to know if they're carrying the disease, or, you know, what responsible people could do. I think if there was somewhere you could go and find out, then you could act responsibly as far as sexual habits and whatnot.
Okay, here's a photograph from Newsweek of a woman giving blood. Mary Hager?
All the blood banks do blood screening for potential donors because they want to be sure that the nation's blood supply is free of the AIDS virus. I think that there are also centers in various parts of the country that have been set up where people can go and get the blood screening test.
Rochester, New York, good morning.
Yes. First a comment and then a question. My first comment's about what an earlier caller said about the response of the homosexual or gay community to the problem of AIDS. And I work in a blood bank in Rochester. And as far as I know, the incidence of transfusion-related AIDS has dropped dramatically since a voluntary appeal went out to the gay community. I think they've responded very well and helped protect the health and the blood supply of the nation. This was way before testing came about.
Caller, isn't there something, I don't want to say it's new, but didn't they come up with some kind of a chemical or device to eliminate any fear? I've read that in one of these many articles I've seen, and I don't know anything about medicine, but are you aware of that?
Eliminate any kind of what?
Fear on that prevents any kind of contamination of any blood. So if you go into any blood bank around the country, you don't have to worry about that anymore?
No, that's not, as far as I know. I don't have access to the most up-to-date information. But as far as I know, since the voluntary restraint of people in high-risk groups from donating, there have been no transfusion-related cases. Now, there is a latency period, so that doesn't mean that people receiving blood products at that point no longer, nobody got AIDS from blood products, but they were previous to those dates.
What is your impression of the coverage the media has given this subject?
I think a lot of it, my feeling, has been very sensationalistic. Part of that has, in part, been fueled by some local groups and throughout the country, and even the CDC response has been over-dramatic. Also, I think the legal implications, a lot of bills being introduced in state legislatures to allow directed donations, and this sort of thing has also fueled the fire and the thing we're all at risk, we're all at danger, and it's us against them. I've even heard people say that we should round up, literally, the gay community and quarantine them.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure our audience understands that, and Mary Hager, you can tell us how far you think you can go as an expert. We are not experts in this field, and I don't want to give any misinformation here this morning. We're talking about how it's been covered by the media, and I think you can find us from time to time lapsing over into trying to deal with the problem itself, which I don't have any information. How far can you go with this in terms of your knowledge?
I can only draw on what I have learned from other people. I certainly don't feel that I'm an expert in it, although I know a great deal.
What I guess I'm getting at is, if you were someone in our audience and they listen to this program, at the end, if they're confused, where would you recommend people go to get medical advice? Their own doctor, or is there, in any locale, is there I suppose we have the National Health Service here?
That's an interesting question. Because it strikes me that some of the confusion that has evolved in the last few weeks has come from the fact that you've got some doctors saying one thing and other doctors saying another thing. And, there's this sort of inevitable, well, who do you believe? Do you believe, I think in one of these stories it quotes a doctor who testified in Queens as saying, that these kids could get AIDS from the infected child, and yet all of the experts, the researchers who have been working with the disease, don't feel that's true, except for preschool children, where they do have sort of a question mark, and all that's spelled out in guidelines that the government has developed.
Northvale, New Jersey, good morning.
Hi, good morning, sir. My question is, why has this issue been postponed? Because of the origination was within homosexuals. Whatever their sexual preference may be, I feel they are American citizens, and why has it been left to just be ignored till it has gone beyond that population?
Okay, you feel that that's the case, Mary Hager?
I don't think you can say AIDS has been ignored. Maybe it wasn't taken as seriously as it might have been 4 years ago, but on the other hand, there were just a handful of patients, and from the government's perspective, you're competing with cancer, which affects many, many more people. You're competing with alcoholism, arthritis, and all of these other diseases, and the people who suffer from them feel they have a legitimate claim on the government's money for research. And you started out with 600 patients.
In the Newsweek cover story this week, they also, as we said earlier, talk about press coverage. And here's a Life magazine cover story from July. "No one is safe from AIDS" is the headline. And our next call is West Hollywood, California. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. What do you think of, you're in Hollywood, what do you think when you see a cover like this on People magazine, "Fear and AIDS in Hollywood, it is a town near hysteria"? Do you agree with that?
No, I certainly do not. I tell you, I am calling from West Hollywood, which we just incorporated, and I'm calling specifically to talk about the recent occurrence of a more positive outlook by the media of people who are living with AIDS. There seems to be a real lack of reporting of people who are consistent with getting over the symptoms of AIDS, getting treatment, and moving ahead. And I think that cannot be forgotten, that there are people living with AIDS. I personally participated with the walk, the AIDS Project Los Angeles. We're feeling so good that finally we're getting some attention and things can be done. But the people that are living with AIDS deserve credit and attention, as well as, unfortunately, the tragic numbers that are dying.
How widespread do you feel this disease is in Hollywood?
Well, sir, I really can't answer that question. I really can't. However, I understand that this is an epidemic, and a very serious one at that.
And do you have friends that have AIDS?
Yes, indeed I do. I have friends who are alive with AIDS.
Have they been cured of it?
Semantics, I'm afraid. Yes, I think that they've been cured. I pray that they've been cured.
Okay, thank you. Mary Hager, can you be cured? You said earlier in the program everyone dies from it.
Well, that's what the, quote, experts keep saying. On the other hand, they have made great progress in treating the diseases that AIDS victims get, so that people are living much longer and the quality of life is much better.
In this People magazine cover story on Hollywood, you see famous faces here who are quoted talking about the situation in that city on the West Coast. Fort Lauderdale, good morning.
Good morning. I'd just like to say that on take two, I heard a doctor say that the gay community drinks the urine and so forth. And I've heard it on television now quite a few times, but never in the print media. And the reason I'm concerned about this, because recently we had a disc jockey who was arrested down here during the spring break for rude acts at a disco. But they didn't say anything. But on television, they came out and said they were passing urine around. But, and I want to ask her, why did she omit this from her article when I think this is so important?
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. I can't answer it.
In the Jonathan Alder analysis of the media here under bathhouses, he says, similarly nowadays, reporters rarely point out the correlation between AIDS and extreme promiscuity, dozens or even hundreds of sex partners, in parentheses, and few newspapers have called editorially for the closure of the remaining gay bathhouses, implicitly accepting the dubious argument of some gay activists that this issue is more one of civil liberties than health. Do you have a reaction?
I think it's a point well made. There's a very fine line between the public health issue and the civil rights issue, and I think it's becoming clearer as this whole situation evolves, that some decisions are going to have to be made that people aren't going to like. And as someone pointed out, there's been much more talk about possibly quarantining people. You would never have heard that months ago.
Chattanooga, good morning.
Yes, I'm calling in regards, I am a nurse and I'm actually taking care of an AIDS patient, and I've never seen any articles stating how the nurses who are giving that care actually feel about it. Because when we first got our AIDS patient, there was no information given out as far as what we should do and how we should take care of them. And then you read all these articles regarding you shouldn't use isolation procedures and this type of thing. And some of the nurses actually refuse to take care of those patients. And, you know, when you get into the medical field, you know that you're going to take care of some patients you do not like. And no one has really regarded an article as how the nurses actually feel who take care of those patients and how they feel about the isolation, whether they should or shouldn't. And at our hospital, we do isolate them. And, you know, things are changing as more information is given out. But no one has actually done an article on how they actually feel.
Okay, let me ask you something about, you have just one AIDS patient in your hospital?
Yes, it's the very first one we've ever had.
Is this gentleman or woman curable?
No, they're not.
How far along are they?
They've had the pneumonia, they've been on the respirator, and we've just now gotten him off the respirator, and he has a tracheostomy, and they're fixing to put in a trach where he can talk. Hopefully we'll move him out. But the doctor keeps saying the infection will come back, and, you know, the mortality rate is supposedly 53%, so he might have a year after this.
Do you know what the first symptoms are of AIDS?
For him, they were flu-like symptoms and a thrush infection in his mouth, and then he got the pneumonia. He's a very knowledgeable person, and he suspected he had it. for a year, but he really wasn't sure. So when he came in, he was pretty sure of what he had, but he never actually been to a doctor to see about this.
Okay, thanks for the call. Mary Hager, an article on nurses and how they care for people with AIDS.
It's a very good idea. I agree. I think the only place I've read something like that was in Medical World News, which is not, circulated to the general public.
Just for our audience to understand how the process works, could you go back to your office today and make that suggestion in a conference or something like that in a meeting at Newsweek where it could result in an article? Is that the way the process works sometimes?
Yes. It'd probably be unlikely it would happen next week because we did so much on it this week, but I know AIDS is going to come up again and again. And I think it's a very good idea.
Reno, Nevada. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was questioning the situation in which the medical profession has failed to go by its usual procedures in the question of AIDS. Usually when there's a divided medical opinion about contagion or something like that, the policy has been in the past to, well, in certain cases quarantine, but certainly to take the most extensive precautions on the assumption that later information may alleviate this. In this case, we're being urged right from the get-go to avoid all of these extreme precautions until they prove that something is dangerous. And I think that we should deal with the question of if a kid is preschool capable of transmitting AIDS through bites and that kind of thing, or wetting his pants and things like that. There are a lot of kids in the first grade who can't do that. There are a lot of kids who bite in the fifth grade, and we're not seeing the medical and policy level decisions made on the basis of taking all precautions possible and then attempting to determine whether or not it is a major threat. I think that, yes, these precautions, quarantines or removing kids from school and things like that, are to a certain degree violations of civil rights, but they do it for hepatitis, they did it for measles, and I don't see why we are suddenly being urged not to worry about it and everything's just fine because it happens to attack a politically powerful segment of our society.
Mary Hager.
That's a hard one to answer. In fact, I'm not sure I can. I think you're beginning to see doctors now say if we're going to err, we should err on the side of caution. In fact, there was a piece in the Washington Post a week ago Sunday which essentially said that. The doctor who wrote it told me he'd gotten a lot of criticism and he expected it because it's such a volatile subject. And yet I think a number of other doctors I've talked to agree, that maybe until we can say absolutely flat out, positively no way, which may never happen, that maybe if we're going to make a mistake, it should be on the side of caution, particularly where kids are involved. And I think if you read the guidelines that the Centers for Disease Control put out on school children, it makes allowances. I mean, if you read it carefully, it's saying if a child can't control, if the child bites at any age, this child probably shouldn't be in school.
Do you realize when you're writing about a subject like this that is so sensitive that you have an unusual responsibility? I mean, do you feel that responsibility when you're putting an article like this together?
Very much so, yeah.
St. Petersburg, Florida, good morning.
Yes, hello. I'm trying to find out what is the chronological order of AIDS? In other words, when did the experts first know the disease? What was the first case reported?
Let me ask you a question because I'm not sure Mary Hager has all that information with her, but let me ask you, when did you first start taking notice that this was an issue to be concerned about?
All right, I guess it was about 1981, around there.
What brought it to your attention?
Just I had read out in San Francisco, the homosexual population had come down with this disease.
What do you think of the coverage that this subject is getting today?
Well, I think that with the existence of AIDS in Rock Hudson, the media just stormed over it.
Too much, not enough?
I'm sorry?
Is it too much coverage or not enough?
Well, I don't know. It could be that there's so much coverage that people are maybe becoming desensitized to it, but it's a really serious disease, I understand that, and I'm glad that it's being covered like that.
Mary Hager, when did you first take note of this disease?
Oh, back in 1981. In fact, I think I was trying to remember exactly when the first story we did was. It was maybe it was in 82. It was at the point where it was maybe 600 victims, and you were talking about the Haitians, the homosexuals, the hemophiliacs, and the intravenous drug users. And since then, the Haitian community has been eliminated as a risk group. I think to address what the caller was saying, Rock Hudson brought it home. I mean, here's somebody that people were used to seeing in their television screens for years and years and years. But I think the thing that really triggered the current round of panic or hysteria or whatever you want to call it was the disclosure that AIDS virus exists in tears. And there was sort of a, gee, if it's there, it must be everywhere. And what does that mean? What if I cry over my child cries on me? Is that a way it's spread? Even though there's no indication that it is, it's still, it's scary. You know, people don't understand it.
We're grappling this morning with the media's coverage of the subject of AIDS. It's the cover story this week in Newsweek, the cover story in People magazine. It was almost a cover story in Time magazine, it appears, at least given an awful lot of attention, and also a full page in U.S. News and World Report, and a lot of stories in your daily newspapers. As a matter of fact, I think there is another story here, and I can't find it right this, here it is. In this morning's Washington Post on the Metro page, teacher dies, second ill with AIDS, disclosure in Baltimore is first for Maryland schools. You might look in your own paper and see if there are any stories there that you might share with us. Yonkers, New York, good morning.
Morning. Good morning, Brian. I'd like to, I have a definite stand on AIDS. First of all, this disease was foisted on us through the bizarre sexual activities of one type of people, the homosexuals.
What do you think of the coverage of it, though?
The coverage of it, I think, has been leaning towards the defense of the homos who have it, and everybody worrying about their civil rights, when the whole country could go down the drain and everybody could die with this, and we could be still worrying about their civil rights. I don't give a damn about their civil rights. I give a damn about the rights of the people who want to be healthy in this country. I often wondered if the symptoms of this disease came about, or you got this disease if you joined the Ku Klux Klan, something in their initiation that you did something that caused you to get AIDS. I wonder if the liberal community and the press would be so lenient with the people who have it and who are spreading it. I want to see our government spend money on this and get a blood test, whether when they test your blood they know you have it or you don't have it. I don't care whether the government then goes for a cure. I'd rather see the government at that point spend all its resources to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. These are people who get afflicted with also a death finality disease, which they get through no fault of their own. But these homos get this disease because of their bizarre sexual activity.
Okay, we'll leave it at that and get Mary Hager's response. You hear much of this?
You know, you hear all sides of the controversy on this. I've heard people say one reason AIDS has gotten so much attention is because it is in the homosexual community, and that this was a very well organized lobbying group, and that's one reason it got money and attention very early. And then I've heard people say, well, gee, if it had struck the Chamber of Commerce or the American Legion, we'd have a solution to it. Somewhere in the middle is the real answer, but...
Mary Hager of Newsweek talking about a cover story that she participated in on the subject of AIDS. Those of you watching this program live will find in just about 15 minutes or so the beginning of another series of hearings before the Senate Rules Committee, the subject, Senate television. In this morning's USA Today, TV or not TV, Senate to decide, a general information article on the beginning of hearings today. And one of the interesting things they publish in this issue of USA Today, the poll that C-SPAN took, right down here on the bottom left on page A8. If you want to find out how your senator in your area feels about this, you can get a copy of USA Today, and it's published right there on page A8. Hearings coming up in just about 15 minutes or so. Mary Hager, your next call, San Jose, California. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. First, I'd just like to say how much I always enjoy C-SPAN. It's really a wonderful channel.
Thank you.
In February, a nun died here in San Francisco from AIDS. And they interviewed the people from the Irwin Blood Memorial, the blood bank, the Irwin Blood Bank. And it was like, well, they said they didn't know. They didn't know when the time they gave her the transfusion. They didn't know. And there was no sense of, it was like, too bad, it was an accident. That was sort of the attitude. And it was, I think that's when my anger began, that there was no sense. I mean, it's like the doctors now. If they don't know something and somebody dies, well, all they're just going to say is, I don't know, I'm sorry, we didn't know. And
what do you think of the coverage of the subject?
I think it sounds mixed up just like everybody's mixed up. It's, the other point is that the other thing that disappoints me is the gay community. They work so hard to make their community somewhat respectable, okay, and building respect for that community. And it's like now when there's trouble, you would think that their leadership would encourage them to act responsibility as a community. And I think what they are hurting themselves after following something is if they have discovered a cure or anything, they have hurt themselves by not being responsible for themselves. And I think it's like that's what disappoints me, and I just want to mention that.
Okay, thank you, San Jose. Let me ask Mary Hager if she thinks, in the confusion that you're hearing in people out there, even on the coverage of today or whatnot, is somebody going to have to step up and take the leadership, in your opinion? And who would that be?
I guess in my opinion, at some point, someone is going to have to take the leadership, and I think that it's unclear at this point. One thing that's happened is that in the past couple of decades, the mystique surrounding the medical profession has vanished. And epidemics past, if the medical profession said with a voice, this is what we do, we quarantine, we close down public pools for polio, whatever it happened to be, people paid attention. Now you have a medical profession that's speaking with a divided voice from different perspectives, and you have people who are questioning because the way medicine has evolved in the past couple of decades, patients have been brought into the decision-making process. There's been a tremendous effort to open up and demystify medicine. So where the leadership is going to come from, I don't know. I suspect it'll come from the research community, and hopefully at some point they'll have more than the virus isolated, and more than the fact that the isolates of the virus in different parts of the country and different parts of the world appear to be different. They're working on a lot of drugs. Maybe sometime in the near future something will look promising. They're working to develop a vaccine. Maybe several years before we know whether anything will work, but maybe that's where the leadership is going to have to come from.
New York City, good morning.
Hello?
Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes. I have a question about one aspect of AIDS problem, which I guess almost no one addressed. This AIDS virus appeared, it really did not exist probably 10 years ago, at least in current virulent form. Don't you think that we should look into the possibility that this virus is artificially created, that it is some sort of bacteriological weapon used on us?
Mary Hager?
That's an interesting idea. I think to the best that anyone has been able to pin it down, the virus seems to have, and the theory is that it's a monkey virus, green monkeys, and that somehow it was transmitted to man in Zaire, and that seems to be where it started. Now, the epidemiologists haven't gone back and checked blood samples from decades past to see if there was any indication of it then. And I know that they're working at things like that. That's part of the medical detective end of it that's really fascinating from an academic and intellectual point of view, although it has, someday it's going to be part of the whole story, but it's not really much help to today's victims.
Mary Hager, the New York Times has a medical doctor that writes all their medical stories. Does Newsweek do the same thing? Do you have anybody at Newsweek writing for a living that's a medical doctor?
No, not to my knowledge. not in medicine anyway.
El Paso, Texas, good morning.
Yes. I read a question to a newspaper a few days ago, and the question was, has any research been done on possible AIDS transmission through mosquito bites? And it occurs to me that if AIDS is transmissible through blood transfusions, that transmission through mosquito bites may be a real possibility. I know Mary's not a doctor, but is she aware of any research either done or about to be done on that subject?
Thank you very much. Let me read, just so I want to read out of your magazine in the cover story what this gentleman's talking about. Here's the lead, the AIDS conflict. Right down here it says, "The smell of fear is already abroad. It is the smell of the insecticide with which a North Side Atlanta man was dousing his backyard one recent afternoon, defending against mosquitoes who might have just taken a nip out of one of the guests at his gay neighbor's barbecue. The sound of fear is echoing through Hollywood Hills also."
For the last cover we did, I did talk to people about that because the fear had just come up then. The answer I got was from a doctor who'd done a lot of research in Africa, where malaria, which is transmitted by mosquitoes, is rampant. And he really discounted the idea because in Africa malaria has no age boundaries. Everybody gets it. Kids get it, teenagers get it, old people get it. That's not true with AIDS in Africa. And he felt that was sort of, really a good suggestion that it is not transmitted that way. In this country where the question came up was in the town in Florida, Belglade, where there's a very high incidence of AIDS, and it's also in Florida, and there are a lot of mosquitoes. And having asked a couple of people about that, I was told yes, but the other thing in Belglade that doesn't come out is that there are a lot of female prostitutes there who are infected, and that may be what the source of transmission is there.
For Mary Hager of Newsweek, Erie, Pennsylvania, next. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'm calling from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I have a two-part question, and perhaps Mary can help us clear a few things up here. One, why does not the Surgeon General of the United States be the spokesperson concerning the types of things we have to look for and be guarded against as a whole in the community, not just the gay community? And I have another question that leads to that, the type of thing that we're all concerned about. Can a bisexual male having sexual contact with a prostitute pass AIDS on to her? She becomes a host for the AIDS virus. A heterosexual male, we'll say on a convention or something else, has sexual contact with her. Does he get the AIDS and take it home to his wife? And isn't this terribly important, this type of question, made clear one way or another to the entire United States?
Mary Hager. Tackle both those.
Second question first. Yes, it's a theoretical possibility. As far as I understand, although there are some doctors who would discount that, and there are some who would say, yes, it's a possibility. The one thing that seems to be a common factor is promiscuity. It seems to take, for most people, the trouble with this disease is you have to keep qualifying everything because there's so much that's not known. But it seems to take a lot of sexual contact with an infected person unless it is spread through the blood. And then it needs to be, high levels of the virus, apparently. In terms of the Surgeon General, that's a good suggestion. He would be, or the Assistant Secretary for Health. Right now we don't have one. We have an acting Assistant Secretary who is also head of the Centers for Disease Control, and I think he has been the spokesperson. He has taken the lead.
Chattanooga, Tennessee, next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was just calling from Chattanooga, and the subject, my wife working at North Park Hospital. They at one time had an AIDS patient over there, and she was worried about what she should be wearing as far as protection is concerned. And it seemed that when she did go into the room, properly protected as we would know, then the mother would get terribly upset about how she was treating the patient. It was making him nervous and what have you. I'm just curious, why she shouldn't be worried about this, right? How the mother feels.
Well, Mary, you want to tackle that? I know I don't want to keep batting these questions away, but Mary Hager is not an expert on treatment of patients and whatnot. And we're trying to talk about the press here. It's hard because people have very emotional feelings about this whole issue. Anything you want to add?
No, I've heard people discussing that particular problem, and apparently there was a time when people went in gowned and gloved and masked. In the first place, the mask apparently doesn't do much good against a virus. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what I've been told. But the patients were made to feel like lepers, and there was some concern for treating them compassionately and with dignity, and that's, I think, why they stopped doing that in some hospitals. I gather some hospitals still do require gowning. And
stigma is addressed by Jonathan Alder in his analysis of the press in your magazine, Newsweek. In New York, where more than 2,000 people have already died from AIDS, a careful reading of the Times, meaning the New York Times obituary page, is required for a full understanding of the impact of the disease. Not too many years ago, bereaved families considered the word cancer taboo in obits. Now cancer, sometimes the specific cause of death, along with pneumonia, after the immune system has been destroyed, is itself frequently used as a euphemism for AIDS. Like the others, this euphemism probably will disappear as the press and the public learn to deal with a disease that both find terrifying and difficult to comprehend. Do you agree with his analysis?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How long is that going to take? You see it happening now?
That's a hard question to answer, too. It seems to me that out of this sort of current round of concern, panic, fear, whatever, what will probably evolve is a greater degree of understanding of what the problems really are and what the concerns ought to be.
Mary Hager, our special guest for the last hour, has for the last 7.5 years been with Newsweek magazine. She participated in writing this week's cover story, The Fear of AIDS. We appreciate her coming to us this morning and discussing what is a difficult subject. Might point out to our audience that there's plenty available in print this week. If Newsweek's not enough, you can go to People magazine, which discusses the situation as people sees it from Hollywood. And as we said earlier, Time magazine also deals with the whole subject in what would be called, I assume, a sub-cover story or something like that. But for Mary Hager of Newsweek magazine, thank you very much for being with us, and to our audience, have a good day. Charlie McDowell often uses humor to get his points across, and this morning he starts out in his column on television in the Senate discussing the facts and the fact that hearings once again are being held. But then, Mary Hager, you've been an observer of this town, he then goes down and provides a number of solutions to the senators. He says it's a good idea, but he says, he makes these suggestions, I think with his tongue in his cheek. He says, senators will not occupy their assigned seats, but will fill the chamber from the front, and the cameras will not pan beyond them. When there are not enough senators to fill the front row, television will superimpose an explanation of the committee system with reference to its importance. Third, no senator will speak for more than 15 minutes at a time, and no senator will speak more often than twice a week unless he has certified to the Secretary of the Senate that he is not a candidate for president. We're going to see Senators Gore, Long, Armstrong, and Byrd being the minority leader, testify this morning, and there may be some others. This is the morning set aside for senators. Tomorrow it's industry people. What is your personal view of televising the Senate or the House?
Oh, I think that's another one you can argue both ways. It seems to me in terms of democracy and getting the country to understand how Washington really works. It's invaluable. It's wonderful.